Okay, anyone not ready?
Yeah.
The standard is maximizing expected well-being. There's always value in preserving life to enjoy. 11. Even if people lead lives not worth living, they believe they do. Some people may believe their future lives will be better. Most of us live lives worth living. For argument, assume lives are not worth living. This does not answer what we should do. We should not commit suicide. Many people will suffer. The advantage war impact tensions are escalating. I prefer superior studies. Dalton Colony 11.1. In February, India and Pakistan came potentially close to catastrophe. That the crisis stopped short of war was due to luck next time. Maybe less fortunate. The current government of India has demonstrated willingness to take considerable risks to revoke the status of Kashmir. Underscores its willingness to reconsider long-standing norms. The next crisis, the odds of that it will escalate to war. If analysts continue to assume the next crisis will be the last one, they ignore alternative scenarios that might evolve very differently. Data from recent crisis behavior supports the need to revisit assumptions. Public reaction in India appears to have vindicated the purported muscular response. Past Indian governments would not have authorized a military operation, but Modi's approach is clearly different. Modi is more risk-accepting than his predecessors. He planned a new India that will no longer tolerate attacks from Pakistan. His decision to revoke the independent status of Kashmir has led Indian officials to call for reclaiming the other half of Kashmir controlled by Pakistan. India's willingness to engage in risky offensive maneuvers is instructive. India can be resistant with respect to the line of control. India may opt to challenge the status quo again. Pakistani leaders would face immense pressure to restore deterrence through escalation. Pakistan would have no choice but to attack Indian forces directly, but could also carry out strikes on more valuable military targets in India. Greater risk of engaging nuclear weapons in the conflict, and conflict independently goes nuclear. A standoff over Kashmir is uniquely likely to escalate. Dosani and Blake 16. India and Pakistan should be considering a return to relative peace in Kashmir. With each strike, the new Indian government faces pressure to retaliate. India has held back out of concern that any military action might end in nuclear exchange until last week. If Pakistan does retaliate, with India hold back the cycle causing escalation to nuclear war. Neither side wants that, but circuit breakers to prevent such an escalation are certain not to work. Any de-escalation intentions require both sides to avoid humiliation. The longer term is even harder to predict, and even a limited conflict escalation results in nuclear winter. Shepard 14. What's worse than nuclear war? Nuclear famine, where the most likely India-Pakistan border, both in nuclear armed and deadly limited nuclear war would result in 2 billion deaths. A war would live so much black students soil into there that would cause nuclear winter. The cause would risk malnutrition, starvation. What follows is epidemic disease. The second advantage is loose nukes. Pakistan's nukes are unique risk of death. The international controls are vital. Nebula 17. Pakistan is a hotspot of global terrorism. The international community must prevent a global catastrophe. Pakistan's AEC reveals how concerned Pakistani officials are. Pakistan is home to hundreds of terrorist extremist groups. Many of them are operational all for provinces, including near nuclear facilities. This raises concern over the growing influence of certain terrorist groups, and terrorist acquisition of Pakistani nuclear materials causes extinction. Economic 16. Pakistan has been long concerned because it has warheads while being a crucible of terrorism. There's a good reason to be careful. The possibility of rogue elements working with a terrorist group is real enough. If a Jesuit group obtained an armed missile with the intention of triggering a nuclear chain, 20 million people would kill directly. The massive firearm would send up tons of smoke leading to nuclear winter. And Pakistan tells Saudi Arabia nukes. Pearson 19. Pakistan is currently in a crisis, may escalate to a nuclear war. Likely Pakistan will provide nuclear weapons to Saudi Arabia, seeking to replace U.S. aid. Trump/aid. U.S. pressure could backfire. MBS promised Pakistan 20 billion cemented membership. Saudi can get nukes from Pakistan at any time. Riyadh is hedging against Iran and nuclear Edelman 11. Any decision by the Saudi government to seek out nuclear weapons would be highly destabilizing. It would increase the incentives of other nations to pursue nuclear weapons, and it could increase their ability to do so. To hear more nuclear powers must be more prone to miscalculation, escalation. Multipolar systems are less able, creating incentives for an attack. Emerging nuclear powers might not avoid a nuclear exchange. New powers might launch on warning uncertainty would trigger a regional nuclear war. The plan. The Republic of India and the Islamic Republic of Pakistan ought to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. CND today. India and Pakistan modernizing and expanding their nuclear arsenals, action with the regional and international peace, possibly a WMD India and Pakistan should stop making new nuclear weapons and get rid of the ones they have, and no shift to conventional war and interdependence. Even if there is a shift, the slightest chance of nuclear war would outweigh a conventional war. P for 15. Major powers becoming far more interconnected. Negotiate a verifiable plan to reliably eliminate all nuclear weapons. Presuppose a degree of progress in interstate relations. Conventional conflict would reduce. The conventional wars in non-nuclear world would have to be weighed against the catastrophic risk of use of nuclear weapons. The underview. 1 year theory is dropped. The debate of the 1 year is too short to rectify a reason. Have a shot at substance. No neg every hour. There was a 6 minute 2 an hour. You can collapse to a short cell and get away with infinite 1 and CVs. Be a shoe brute time spent on theory. No new 2 on theory. Should just stand. There's 3 paradigm issues because I have 1 speech to respond to them, which makes the round of resolvable. It's also impossible to respond to 6 minutes to theory and 3 minutes due to just brute time spent on theory. And 4 fairness is the voters constitutive an activity based on wins and losses. It comes before substance. I wasn't able to answer the substance. It's unfair in the first place. And policy literacy is important. It facilitates policy access and builds a sustainable epistemic community against nuclear deterrence. Fire 18. If disarmament is the best scenario, a stop warring attitude cannot be an option. Deterrence is not foolproof, and failure is catastrophic. Only complete and irreversible disarm represents a definitive solution. This can be prompted by being an active member of an epistemic community engaging in disarm education. Knowledge was a key ingredient of how new ideas and data lead to new patterns of behavior that disrupt the status quo. These may prove a game changer for international policy coordination, including arms control. How decision makers formulate policies can be a function of the manner in which issues are presented by specialists. Epistemic communities thrive identifying cause and effect relationships, helping governments define their interests, framing the issues for collective debate, and proposing specific policies or salient points for negotiation. When a problem is highly technical, experts dominate the policy process. Nonetheless, as policy is seldom purely technical, scientists cannot avoid politicization. If info is shared, the power of epistemic communities will be extended thanks to the large number of informed citizens. This is why education are essential. The perception that there are no longer real nuclear dangers is dangerously flawed. Deterrence is no guarantee in a multipolar world. Combating ignorance, complacency, and a culture of violence continues to be critical. What we know little about, we care little to do anything about. At the university, experts are in short supply. Educating is an advocacy, a way of building social movement action toward lower arms and ultimately complete disarmament. And threat inflation would get on my author's fired Ravenolo 9. What's missing for most analysts claim of threat inflation, however, is a convincing theory why national security will is devotion to rationality in the derivation of policy and objectivity in the treatment of parameters will-derived behavior tends to be formalized and codified, transparent, and peer-reviewed. Defense decision-makers attempt to frame the structure of the problems that they try to solve on the basis of the most accurate intelligent threats are not socially constructed. Non-rationalities are five for presenting pseudo-analysis and making bad prediction and merely propagating ideas without a strategy for actualization crowns out the striving influence of balance of interest for people in power, which is the only way to change the process of racialization. Act 17. A direct approach to injustice may be needed to address unfair policy and existing conditions for minorities and racist societies. What people care about is not just ideal justice, but how immediate justice and concrete events can be created here and now. Models of justice assume words by themselves have the power to transform reality, only though, or as though to create agreements with words will automatically result in action. Fantastically and effectively utopian. Appreciative justice takes a comparative approach, pragmatic approach. Government is an ongoing contention among interest groups. Rights secured by justice are constantly subject to political bargaining and the calculus of social interest. Outrage, critiques of white supremacy, or analysis of white privilege cannot change anything by themselves. By contrast, changing the rules of engagement might have causal power. Reality cannot be changed by normative pronouncements, but only shifts in the interests of groups of real people. The base hope for change of normative content alone may eliminate means for taking action that could result in change. Political philosophers should construct math politics or a party in power challenge justice. Those who aim to justice must struggle against such obstacles through specific changes in concrete practice as well as changes in law.
You read everything?
Yeah. Wait. Let me see. I thought. Yeah, I read everything.
You good?
Mm-hmm.
You're in the Beale 17 evidence says the phrase global jihadism. What is that?
Where does it say this?
Is a hotbed of global jihadism. It says that in like the first line of the Beale 17 evidence. What is global jihadism?
Jihad is it's just a type of terrorism. It's a specific type of movement.
Okay, what does it mean for something?
It's not a type of terrorism, but it's a specific Islamic movement that uses military.
Jihad?
Jihad? Like, I don't see how this is relevant to that. Jihadism is just an Islamic movement.
It's a question of the representations that you're like presenting in this round, and I want you to answer.
I don't think that line was read.
Huh?
I did not highlight jihadism. I should not be responsible for everything.
It's just an incomplete sentence, and like you previously tried to like highlight away from it. You probably shouldn't be reading evidence like this in the debate space.
That's like saying I shouldn't read evidence where an author says he. Obviously, we have the ability to do things like brackets.
Read evidence that like okay, that's fine. That'll be the debate. Let's talk about the under B debate proper. The Zach evidence. What's the warrant in it?
Let me pull it up. Oh, it just says that basically just critiques of white supremacy or analysis doesn't actually change anything by themselves, only nuanced policy debate, or actually fiating the resolution engagement in it, looking at the policy literacy. It would just be education about things like fiat implementation,
what does it mean
conflict, causal, cause and effect analysis. Those are all examples. Advocacy skills.
Does studying the representations of policymaking matter?
What do you mean?
Does studying the representations of policymaking matter? According to your Fordari et al. 18 evidence.
Yeah, representations are just one part of policymaking.
Okay, sounds good. Let's talk about the no shift to conventional war argument. Where is this talking about India and Pakistan?
No, it's just saying that even if there's a shift to conventional war, a risk of nuclear war would outweigh, and it would also say that because once they denuclearize, it would also create progress in their interstate relations, which would prevent conventional conflict.
Okay, but it's not specific to India or Pakistan, right?
Not that card.
Okay, which card is then?
The 7 cards in the advantage.
The 7 cards in the advantage says that there's no conventional.
No, they're specific to India and Pakistan.
Okay, no, can you read me a line that's specific to India and Pakistan, or a card that's specific to India and Pakistan that says there's no conventional war that happens?
Well, the 2 uniqueness cards would say that,
make that claim,
only the 2 uniqueness cards give the claim that the only reason that war is likely is because of their nuclear arms racing in the status quo. Getting rid of those nuclear weapons would obviously ease tensions in the region.
Okay, let's talk about the framework debate proper, the Tanjo evidence. What's the warrant in it?
That there's always value to life. It basically says that, for example, if you give the example of people don't have value to life now, but they will believe their future lives do have value, which means that we should still do good things, and then that most lives are worth living.
Okay, I'm sending out the doc. It's forward in case.
on case, it's going to be the underview, the framing debate proper, and then the advantage. Mm-hmm. The order is 4, then on case, underview, framing, advantage. Okay, good?
Yeah.
Good? Good. Good. Okay. First off is the critique the use of the term jihadism and jihadist terrorism in several cards is grossly Islamophobic. Racist co-opted the term jihad, which Muslims use to describe fighting injustice as a term associated with violence and terrorism. Even if they didn't explicitly read the card, it functionally justifies them. Other cards having things like the N-word in it, and still reading it. You have read evidence in this round that is are functionally from racists who use language that is inherently problematic and Islamophobic. It's a functional equivalent of causing exclusion. If anyone sees these arguments, then that's the reason why she lose. Also, the word jihadism was underlined, and he tried highlighting a round in which either one he's trying to make his cutting is unethical, concerning the fact that his first card doesn't have correct highlighting, or in the other where he's just Islamophobic, and he's read evidence in this round which is probably bad and should be automatically rejected. Mohidin. A jihadist is Islamic for which jihad one holy work is not Muslims second and struggle against something in every not contemporary English is only the first meaning which non-Muslims are familiar with, i.e. holy war fight against Muslims. Defend Islam is the material jihad is constantly used to mean a violent armed struggle against the Western wage by radical Islamic terrorists. The word jihad is in the context of Islamophobia has come to nearly mean a Muslim who fights a holy work as a mainly the Western argument. Also pulling links from the affirmative argument. Pakistan is a hotbed for global jihadism, which is the argument he tried highlighting out of these arguments, which but he still underlined it, which proves that there's still a chance that someone can see it. And it causes things like psychic violence, which calls eternally the economist evidence. Also, literally says jihad is terrorism, and he also tried to cut around this, which means that he has racist authors, and he's just trying to cut around the fact, which is just another form of white fluidity that tries to reorient the way his representations operate. You should vote him down for reading these representations. Says, dang, the race war terror discourse is Islamophobic, and you say as an excuse to carry an imperialist foreign policy. It's not about the words, but the representation. Dale Roof wasn't labeled a terrorist, not because of his action, but because of his skin color. Let's see. The Cold War was a country race war against the toward liberation movements. The Cold War fractured the black international thought foreign policy views communists a bigger threat to the world within the country. This no critique the fundamentals of premise of U.S. foreign policy is colonial assembly than in a post 9/11 era. Terrorism is remnants the biggest issue of the Western world, and there's the third world logically justify U.S. hegemony. Just as with the label of communist, there has been a chilling effect on critiques of fear of being labeled as a terrorist because of the ideological track of Islam and as anti-American activists or read themselves in American tradition and claim that Muslims are American in an effort to this claim that Muslims are Americans have contained a systemic critique of empirical foundations of the United States. Vote negative to reject their association of Islam with terrorism and all their evidence that is so decisively Islamophobic. Calling out Islamophobia in educational spaces is key. It's our responsibility to use the classroom and challenge violent representations. Always procedural claims is all. 12. This classroom points to the necessity for a critical pedagogical sense that addresses the manifestations of Islamophobia. Young Muslim Americans across the U.S. experiencing anti-Muslim sentiment. Muslim Americans are a monolithic group. During discussion and trial, the pedagogical practices that contributed for the oppression of Muslims in the U.S. Discriminatory discourse manifest themselves in the classrooms. Cut the card at classrooms and endorsing racist discourses, the racist ethical theory, independently use reason to reject their performance to judge, and ballot should be an educator. That is and this is a teachable moment. You should use the ballot to reject Islamophobia. Events 13 performance is always attached to their body, not enforcement of the flow or decision to round reflect their beliefs that we hold is no longer enough for judges to vote off the following. We must begin to value the speech activists. All debaters must be held accountable for the implications of the speech. Educators and debate have an ethical obligation, ethical atmosphere. Education judges must hold debaters accountable. They must be willing to vote against a debater if they endorse a racist discourse. We must view debate as a performance instead of arguments solely on the flow. We do not live in a vacuum. The discourse we produce in the debate has real implication, and when we lead this debate, it outweighs all their offense. One point representation outweigh all offense. 1 point is unique to ire the judge, and many debaters have probably never been to both India and Pakistan. So reps control the understanding the region. Second is their driving force of policy action or rational considerations of threat or not conceptual understanding of the threat. Third, fiat is illusory. Voting won't cause a political intervention. Even if the plan would be good, but examining your role as scholars and students ensures real world change. For but your representations have a lasting impact. When we leave the space unique to this round compared to the policy education we get over this topic over the course of the term. And 5, discursive framing has to comfort the way we represent our discursive form, the way we conceptualize truth and acceptable reps that precede policy discussion because they mediate our understanding of policy. The next stop, obviously, things like personal experience and their understanding of Islamic freedom because of second violence. For example, as someone as a brown person, I've always commonly been stereotyped with forms of terrorism, which means it causes psychic violence against individual debaters. Proven in this round, debate must use a 3-tier process to justify the plan's nuclear policy. Academics are grounds of the personal experience. Anything else causes exclusion. Read Brickley. Wait. Social power within debate to determine legitimate knowledge. These practices maintain dominant practice of counting alternate knowledge to the truth-tier process. Debaters see documented evidence with other forms of knowledge. The truth-tier process, personal experience, organic source of traditional evidence, experience in intellectual place on part with traditional evidence. Debaters also were in order to practice that exclude minorities. We use traditional and personal narratives so you don't get one perspective. Next off. We're in the midst of a race war, and people of color are fighting for the lives. Black churches are being bred Louisiana. The election of an all-red president to afford the minority congressman to go back to broken and crime-infested countries and call Governor Sharpton a con man who hates whites and cops and white nationalists like Dylan Rose, slaughtering African Americans while after confessing to trying to start a race war. The 21st century wave of white racialized white national violence has solidified the race war, and we need to fight back. And also relying as a voting issue on their wiki, they said they were on the right side of the race war, but continue to read after criminalized brown countries for their needs, which is the exact logic of Western imperialism and proves that they are wolves in sheep's clothing. How can they be on the right side when they have read nothing but love for affirmance this entire term, which means you should reject reject the affirmative on face value. Skip the card that always all their offense. We made specific arguments how wolves in sheep clothing means you shouldn't trust them on any part of the flow. There's a trusting to the arguments, the theory hedge. Reject one error, proof constant theory, 8.6 time, QB, 1 or 3, and 2 records away, however they want, C point, judge, college, judge, more likely by 2 arguments, the last D point method testing, too many 3 false, makes it impossible to test the method, 1 your theory, unique class, too much, E point is resolvability, 1 point, 1 reciprocity, you go to 2 on speech, advantage, seconds, normie, you only get 2 speeches, new arguments to the repeater of a show, which is enough time and could create worse norms, and it also means you have an advantage in things like infinite abuse arguments, that point, there's no such thing as infinite abuse, once you only a sentence on G point, 1 or 3, used as a strategic advantage, means infinite abuse claim should be viewed through a grain of salt, skip the where not is proper, even if you don't buy or reject it, it's a reason why it's drop the argument, reasonability, also independently valid performance, and 1 error after the 1 error theory after the 2 error, 1 point reciprocity, 1 key giving us 1 speech each to be point result times the arguments as we have to go for the shell, perf con, and substance. You would just collapse to the independent voting. The 2 are second key to deter frivolous theory issues, and we'll only read a shell if there's real abuse rather than trying to time the 2 in our case. The under view debate proper, you should allow new responses. 1 point is all these arguments to be newly implicated in the next speech, which means actually get new responses. Second is how they take out their small arguments that would take out huge parts of the 1C, which means we should get new responses. You say, no, negative is 1 and 3, yes, we should get one, otherwise they could read infinite amounts of 1 year shells and proliferate the debate. It also means we can't focus the debate on Islamophobia, which is what our world about stuff says we should. You say no need to in our theory standards on shells, we should be able to consider, otherwise it's a no risk option for them and makes it impossible for the fairness may be a voter, but obviously representation comes prior because it controls eternally to accessibility. Accessibility should be an impact filter to all their arguments. Form comes prior to content. They need to evaluate the ethicality of their form and the sort of representation they have prior to their arguments so far for Dottie at all 18 evidence. 1 point, this is the reason why the K outweighs. We have 1 reasons why specific offense, why the K creates better political literacy by rejecting Islamophobic discourse. The second debate not the plan matter, but obviously representations influence how policymakers do the affirmative, which means it comes prior to their ravenal evidence. 1 point, they're contingent on a mainstream ideology of Islam always being a sort of threat, which was the chair talk argument we make, which impact turns out this threat inflation argument and how it's always constructed by ideology. This is the next argument, the Zach 17 evidence. 1 point is it means we can never test their epistemology and allows them to say the N-word and get away with it. Obviously, we need to understand how the way ideas shape or understand the world. Second, Zach has no warrant to vote on. Third, ideas matter. You're reading a racist shit is a reason you should lose. 4, relationship require an accessible conceptual frame, which means it comes prior to all their offense case. No shift towards counterforcing. Per this evidence is Indian. It's no shift towards counterforcing India's NFU stable. Raj 17. The possibility that you might use nuclear weapons to contra the key pillars of Indian nuclear things is no. First, use successive prime minister, including money ever from this major of India's doctrine will find the face of histories of nuclear power, cut the card, and nuclear power and. Second is dialogues. And E28, Pakistan's government is career papers to resolve because the country to resolve all outstanding PM Khan said he wanted to resolve all outstanding issues through dialogue. He added it was the time the 2 countries sat across the table and discussed issues. I'll send it Mark Doc.
It's fine. I was like, you good for cross?
Yeah.
Alright, the dialogues card. It's from 2018, right? But you put 828.
Yeah.
Okay. So the dialogues, if it started in 2018, how come it hasn't worked for this entire
So we have made an argument that it's linearly decreasing over time, which probably is terminal defense to all your arguments.
Okay.
It also means that there's like sorry to cut you off. It also means that there's like an external check on these arguments. It's not just that it's like earlier, but we have made arguments why things like dialogue would check proliferation.
Okay, the lying stuff actually.
Mm-hmm.
What is the warrant for this?
We have made arguments as to why you have lied about your side of the race war, which is problematic.
Because I read a plan app?
No, because you actively, one is the critique is an example of how you're on the wrong side of the race war. Another example is the fact that you have only read affirms that sort of criminalize brown nations when the U.S. has like the most like nuclear stockpiles. We've made specific arguments how like this understanding of nuclear arsenals is like rooted in a Western calculus and is a form of imperialism. It means you're just a wolf in sheep's clothing that tries to say they're on the right side of the race war, but in reality you're just preaching benign policies that recreate violence.
Okay, what's the warrant of like criminalizing brown countries if you didn't read the evidence?
It doesn't like we still made the argument analytically.
It seems like if I win, the advantage is a high probability. Is that still criminalizing them?
Well, we made arguments. Your choice to focus on Indian nations and only focusing on LARPAFs and high extinction level threats over the quotidian forms of violence that is the race war is an example of how you would be on the wrong side. Part of it is yes, you just. Oh shit, my computer died.
Did you use this process to justify
Yep.
the NC?
Yep.
What are the 3 tires?
It's in the card. Personal experience, organic intellectuals, and traditional evidence.
What is organic intellectuals?
Organic intellectuals are individuals that use their narratives and time and like personal experiences to justify like arguments.
Sure, the critique. So first, the definition of jihadism It seems like there's a contradiction. Actually,
No, it's how the reason why there's two different definitions is because racists have co-opted the term as something that is used to fight the West, and jihadism is conflated as that when reality.
Okay, but I'm confused on the impact because none of it was highlighted in the act.
Huh?
Actually, better question. The
So-
word card, it uses gendered language.
Huh?
Why do you read the?
Well,
word
your
card
evidence does
gendered
as well,
language?
which means it's terminally non-unique.
So the debate's washed now.
No, the Islamophobia debate, our role with the ballot stuff is specifically in the context of why you need to prioritize impacts to Islamophobia.
Alright, but gendered language wouldn't matter.
Well, since we've both used it, it would probably be non-unique. Also, you need to prove a violation first before we can like have this debate.
Sure. And then can it be a floating pick?
No.
Okay, and status of all the advocacies?
Well, it's just one. Like, there's only
Alright,
one
what's that
advocacy.
status?
It's unconditional.
Starting from.
Or actually, sorry, it's conditional. Sorry.
Okay. The Warren card where it says unfairness is good, it would
That
be
was
okay. Okay, great. yeah, I sent the doc. So the order will be case, and then 1 and C in order.
Okay, so case and then the 1 and C. Where on case are you starting?
The advantage. Yeah.
Can I take your seat?
Yeah. Anyone not ready?
Alright, I'm good.
Great. Conceded the second advantage that Pakistan uses stolen by terrorists, or that they sell it to Saudi Arabia, which causes Middle East proliferation, which causes nuclear war. The 100% of the advantage is conceded. Now the K proper. The K first, that they also link it to this. The warrant has he in it, which is gendered language. There's no unique reason why us not highlighting the card is it incentivizes a terrible model debate where we just nitpick tiny parts of cards that are obviously miscut. That's why people read things like brackets, and I didn't highlight it because obviously I don't endorse every single language. And the card, the K proper, the link there is no link to this K because the link is about how jihadism is misinterpreted, but the 1AC evidence talks about jihadist terrorism, which is a specific part of jihadism that is negative, even though that jihadism in general means fighting against poverty. Jihadist terrorism is a form of militancy that causes violence, which means that out in specificity, it doesn't matter. You should use evaluative modesty on this, which means if I win defense on their independent voter, it means you should just reject it because there's always a risk of offense they can do on it. And the rep focus ignores material injustice. You should prefer specific policies first. Taft Kaufman 95. Talk of discourses ignore conditions that are produced so they believes in a vision for injustice. The emphasis on discursive without analysis how a discursive emerges from material circumstances hides the complex task of envisioning and working toward concrete social goals. Justice is not just textual starting point for organizing, and the content of political action must be present existential concrete situation, ideas of consequences, emphasizing the discursive. It's a humane failure. The need to look beyond text, perception, attainment, and concrete goal specifics of how power works, political agendas, and we should be able to weigh the case against this. It outweighs, since it would just moot 7 minutes of 1AC offense. They didn't read the fairness is bad stuff, and also that there's no warrant to this. They've conceded that they also link into this case because they read gendered language. Just because they say Islamophobia is first doesn't mean other forms of violence doesn't matter, which means there's no unique link to their offense on the weighing stuff. They say it's unique to IR, but that obviously isn't, because if you could just nitpick any part of our evidence, it would prevent actual policy discussions, which is what the underview card talks about, which is key to actually creating disarmament in the first place. They say fiat's illusory, but they conceded that policy debates about it will lead to disarmament in the future. Anyway, the last argument that they say that the reps have lasting impact, but if we always just nitpick up random pieces of evidence, it would mean that there's no impact to anything. The second off the 3 tire thing, this is terrible, and this is also offense on it. Bambara 10. Troubling has been the claim that only women can be feminists or black people can work against racism. Only those who experience injustice can understand and act based upon a socialist theory which assumes possibility of knowledge is restricted to one's possession of irreducible traits. Separatist tendencies perpetuate the individualist fallacy that oppressive relationships can be performed by particular subjects without broader agreement of others who constitute social relations with injustices or embedded structures of inequality overlap with identity. Politics based on identities liberatory and necessary. Cut the card. Necessary. The meat. You could just ask me in CX and I would have identified I'm Indian. I have a family there and my experiences from traveling there. That solves all the offense on the shell, and you should reject the shell. It also forces outing of personal identity that causes psychological violence against people, which is also offense because people will be forced to disclose how they relate to the violence that happens in India and Pakistan during their conventional wars, which would obviously be violent. It's also infinitely aggressive. Why would those 3 specific things have to be spec? We would have to spec infinite relationships with everything according to their intent. You violate because you didn't spec your relationship to the 1NC performance for the performance itself. The lying stuff now. First, they didn't read the card. Since the advantage is conceded, it's not criminalizing. It's not criminalizing brown nations. I also read a LARPAF on September, October about the U.S. Switch side debate obviously solves. I read different apps about different countries on different topics. It's not like I exclusively choose the marginalized brown countries. You also link. They say policy making is bad, but you read a policy making September, October SAT and ACT app, which means at worst it doesn't link. They say policy apps and talk of extinction paper over the race war. But since the advantage is conceded, there's 100% chance of extinction. They say it papers over the race war, but they've conceded the card in the underview that talking about policy debate creates militant skills necessary to actually form movements that actually cause disarmament in the status quo, which means it's a key for the race war because nuclear weapons and uranium mining is based on foundations of slavery, which only getting rid of nukes can solve, which the alternative to this doesn't solve. The link debates proper. The link debate proper is that they did not read the card, which means that we're not securitizing against India. They've conceded that threat inflation would just get my authors fired, which means there's substantive justifications on why nuclear weapons would be sold, why nuclear weapons would be stolen, and why Pakistan is specifically not guarding its nuclear weapons properly. At worst, they link into every single off they read, and we have offense on the off, so they can't just collapse. Yeah.
Okay. 4 minutes starting now. Independent voting issues in the 1 hour. What? Independent voting issues in the
I don't know what you mean by like independent voting issues. There's often some places.
Okay.
You want me to like talk about the offense?
No, that's fine. What was the argument that you should reject the shell on Reed Brinkley?
Oh. Forces like outing a person identity that causes psychological violence, for example.
So you should reject the shell because it forces outing?
What do you mean? Yeah.
So the argument is
What do you mean
should
by, like,
reject
outing?
the shell because it forces outing.
What do you mean by that?
I'm asking what the argument
No, what do you mean by like outing? It says
Or
it would
whatever
force
you're-
you to like disclose your personal identity, which could be like you have like some like.
And that's a
violent-
reason to reject the shell.
That's offense in the shell.
You just said it's a reason to reject the shell.
It would also be offense. It's a reason why the shell doesn't matter. Yes, so you should
Okay.
not vote on it.
All right, fair enough. What card had gendered language? Was it Warren?
Yeah.
So the card we didn't read?
You still put in the doc under your interpretation. Like literally just pointing out anything would be bad. That's the exact reason why your K is silly.
The order is Reed Brinkley,
Lubinov, and then the K.
Okay. Did anyone get the order? Good, good. Okay. The read blankly debate proper will concede terminal defense that this isn't a good model debate. That just means you shouldn't evaluate it independently. He made arguments about how his own personal experience, which means if psychological bonds to this outing argument is truly true, then he shouldn't have engaged in the model. And any reason why our model is bad is also a reason why he engaged in it, which means it's a performing contradiction that flips both ways. And a reason why you should just reject the shell on face. There's no link differential between the both of us. These also, just because there's offense to the shell, they didn't clearly implicate into reversible voting issue, nor was this an argument. This was just a framing argument, which you win, which is not a reason why you should win the debate, just a reason why you should shift the frame of the debate, which resolves other offense. Also, these arguments were implicated as independent voting issues, which means you don't let the two-hour collapse do it. Obviously, we're going to go for a reason why representation comes prior to all their arguments, which resolves all the read blankly debate proper. Yeah. The next flow. The line debate proper will concede we didn't read a proper link, which means there's no link to this argument. We'll also concede arguments about how you didn't criminalize anything, which solves back all your offense as well. And there's a reason why there's no offense on this flow either. Independently, we have made arguments. They've made arguments why substance debate obviously matters in this argument, and we have made arguments why representations matter, which means you should take every step to default back to these arguments. You should hold the line from the one error to the two error. Don't let a two error collapse on any of these offensive flows, especially when the critique is a prior question of accessibility in the debate space itself, which impacts all their offensive reason as to why we differently come first. Decay. Protect my 2NR strategy. I don't have a 3NR, which means the 2R can be infinitely unpredictable and makes it impossible for me to engage. Decay. Starting with framing. Concession of the Vincent evidence of Deming. It means the role of the ballot judges to be educator, and this is a teachable moment. You should use your ballot in order to prioritize the rejection of racism. In round, this was a conceded form of evidence, which means any risk that they're racist is a reason why you should feel very comfortable voting negative for the critique. And that means you should. It also means the strength of link debate definitively flows negative. The line by line debate proper on the framing debate. You should prioritize representations over material policy. The concession of the Vincent evidence means that debate itself isn't just debates about political action, but also the sort of performances we had, which sort of disproves all their arguments and the reason as to why we're definitively ahead on this page. Also, second. They've considered a couple of arguments on this page, and the arguments that we made on the underview are a reason why we're going to be ahead. They say reps focus ignores materiality. They conceded a form content distinction on the underview that before you evaluate the efficacy of the content of the 1A, so you have to evaluate whether it was accessible. They also conceded accessibility is the impact filter to every argument they make concerning the fact that we need to be able to true test their arguments and be able to engage it before it comes which means that the only way we can mobilize materialities and materialized movements is through the critique and representations, and it comes prior to being able to debate in the first place. They also, the Vincent evidence means you should err on the side of representations, and that you should vote negative because they said something right, and representations are a prior question to things like fairness, which means you don't get to weigh the case. Conceded this argument that accessibility comes before famous on the underview because it controls the internal link to being able to engage. Fairness obviously assumes access to the debate space, which we made arguments that their Islamophobic rhetoric makes it impossible for us to actually engage, which means you differently vote negative. Okay. The rhetoric of jihadism, the one that sees offense to the term jihad, has been co-opted by Islamophobes and white supremacists to weaponize Islam against Muslims. None of their links or evidence is predicated on the religion of terrorists themselves. The fact that they use the phrase jihadist terrorism means they're associating the religion with terrorism, which sort of proves all our terror talk arguments that they didn't respond to, and it means it comes prior to every other impact since they cause forms of psychic violence, which was an example of the personal narrative I gave. Their reading of this made the debate unsafe for me since I've dealt with these issues in the past, which comes prior to every other impact. It means you kill policy deliberation. They conceded policy literacy is contingent on our ability to analyze representation, which means it comes first. We don't refer to Dylan Roof or Timothy McVeigh's white terrorists. We never read arguments about white Christian terrorist threats to U.S., but Islam is always constructed in opposition to peace. We don't need to win reps for you to vote on Vincent. You vote them down for saying the N-word regardless of the consequences of the policy, regardless of if representation shape policy discussion. The reps are bound to Muslim debaters and judges. Our model subsumes theirs. They still get to read the AF with different link cards, and even if they win a theoretical external reason why their rhetoric could be good in the abstract, they have actually chosen to promote violence with here, which proximately frames impact calculus in this debate. The line by line. The line-by-line debate proper, there's a couple of framing issues. They make an argument how we use gendered languages. Well, I will do the link differential with these two arguments. One point is your evidence also has gendered language, which means you don't validate. Second, the only link they have to gendered language is an argument we didn't read in the 1NC, but a link we have on the critique is an argument that was proactively read and around, and it was underlined in the card, which probably means you should vote affirmative. Also, they use gendered language. For example, their framing argument says men, it says humankind, which uses the word men, and which sort of proves our argument that every sort of argument, which means there's no link differential on this K page, but they haven't one of the reasons why we are uniquely Islamophobic, but we have a reason why there's no link differential between the gender debate, which means you differently vote negative. And also all our framing issues specific to the way Islamophobia is overcoded within education, which means yes, the other forms of oppression matter, but you should prioritize Islamophobia because it comes as a prior impact to your ballot, and you're psychologically less likely to believe arguments about it. They say there's no link to the critique, considering that we use the phrase jihadist terrorism, but this is the link itself. We don't say things like we don't say a white terrorist. We just say, for example, Dylan Roof wasn't called a white terrorist. He was just Dylan Roof wasn't called like a Christian terrorist. He was called a white terrorist, which proves that they're uniquely associated associating religion with terrorism, and it proves that even if none of their cards specifically say it, they have made a specific argument in the 2 and R about associating these 2 arguments, which means it definitely comes prior. You say evaluated on a claim of modesty. No, it's a question of yes or no. Either you were racist or you weren't racist, which comes prior to every other impact. And if we want to Vincent evidence, then you should feel comfortable voting on this modesty argument is used by one as to sort of reinterpret their understanding. Though they also conceded an argument about how the fact that they tried to re-highlight or run these arguments is a form of whiteness that tries to reinterpret how the debate operates, which means it comes prior to every other argument. They say they make an argument as to how debates about policy makes leads to things like disarmament, but it's a question of how those policy debates are sort of lined by ideological forces that are inherently violent to debaters of color, which means we come as a prior prerequisite to all their impacts. And you should feel very comfortable voting negative the psychological bias argument on me specifically, even if not all their arguments are true in the abstract, because to me specifically because of the personal experience I had as a brown person and being associated with a terrorist. It's a reason why you made this debate psychically unsafe, and I don't feel comfortable with these arguments that you read, which means it comes prior vote negative to reject their use of terrorism. You can just use the word terrorism, which solves all their offense, but saying jihadist terrorism is a sort of conflation of the 2 words, which is not worse. Look, this debate is super simple. We have won a clear link differential on this gender stuff, which means you don't vote on it, and it was on a card we didn't even read. They have conceded a bunch of arguments, and specifically in the context of debate space, why you're like the prima facie thing that you have to do with your ballot is reject offense or reject Islamophobic discourse.
The order will be the second off and the first off. Anyone not ready? Great. Here's the problem. I'm going to concede to the role of the ballot that reps matter, but the weighing issues, you should use strength of link between the offense I have on the second off and the army offense I'll have on the first off. I'll do weighing it later in the debate, which proves that it's going to be an easy app ballot. The 3 tire stuff, they've conceded the Bomber 10 card that this is a terrible norm for debate because it would force only women to read feminist positions, only black people to work against racism, which would cause violence against debaters. We have to intersect identities and positions so they can actually challenge forms of racism within the debate space. For example, if white people would be incentivized to say the N-word if they're hitting another white debater, this 3 tire process stuff would incentivize infinite violence against other bodies if they don't relate to their own position, which prevent social relations and also community building between minorities and other sensitive debaters, which would obviously cause violence. The second thing is that they've conceded the outing dissent because people will be forced to disclose their personal identity, which causes psychological violence. It applies to the Islamophobia role of the ballot because people reading the Indo-Pac app would have to disclose, for example, Muslims who read the Indo-Pac app would be forced to disclose violence they experienced as a child or something like that, which would also function under Islamophobia impact. Now I just have to answer the silly arguments they make. They said they conceded terminal defense. Bomber was offense, not conceded terminal defense. They said I link since I disclosed my personal identity. No, you forced me to disclose my personal identity, or else I would have lost on this shell, which is the exact thesis of the outing dissent. I didn't read it. I was forced to read it. They say it wasn't a voting issue. Yes, it was a reason to reject them, and obviously don't have to label it as a voting issue. If it's offense and why their representations are bad, it's still a reason to reject them, since I still say it's a reason their representations and forcing people to out their identity and preventing liberation strategies for other debaters would obviously a bad thing, which is a reason to reject them, which means that the last argument I have to answer, which is the last argument. Now I just have to do wing between the K and this independent and the turn on their second off. You should use strength of link between the K and the turn on their off. First, I'll give a couple of reasons why their K has a tiny link, which means you can easily vote AF. One is that they just read a K about a word that is not even highlighted in the 1AC. You purposely nitpick looking for some tiny word and made a huge big deal about it, while my turn outweighs because you explicitly read the 3 tire process and said I was forced to do that, where their K is about a word I didn't even highlight. The second is that you actually read the position that says I'm forced to out my identity. Well, I just read an AF and you looked for the jihadism link. The third is that they've conceded the infinite regress this had on the critique, because it would just justify looking for any word in authors. There's obviously reasons why we bracket evidence, and I didn't highlight it because I disagree with the terminology. Now I just have to answer this. It caused him personal psychological violence, but the problem is that the turn on the offense would also cause me psychological violence, because I was supposed to out my relationship to the Indo-Pak, which would obviously be psychologically violent. Either way, the defense is reasons why. Either way, the sufficient defense on their critique is sufficient to vote on the psychological violence caused by the three-tier dissent. It also outweighs on scope, since it's a question of how we can engage in the debate space in the first place, because three-tier would prevent debaters from reading positions that they don't identify with, which would harm the proliferation of things like feminist scholarship or black scholarship. So easy F ballot, the turn on it is offense under reps because it causes outing and limits scholarship, while we have defense on their K. Strength of link, F ballot.